Welcome along to the main stage of Event Tech Live USA Canada 21 and to our first session of day 3, producing the Sophos Cybersecurity Summit, the review. I'm delighted to say that joining us now from our friends and partners at First Sight Media is Mr. Rich Belcher. Rich, it's good to have you back at Event Tech Live. We're looking forward to your session this afternoon.
Hey James, good to see you, and welcome everyone to day 3 of ETL US and Canada. How quickly time flies, James, eh?
Indeed, Rich. I'm going to hand straight over to you to bring in your guests. Best of luck with your session, Rich, and I'll see you a little bit later on.
Thanks, mate. Great. So good morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world, everybody. I'm Rich Belcher from First Sight Media. A lot of you will not have heard of me or indeed of the Sophos EVOLVE Cybersecurity Summit. But myself and a couple of special guests are going to be joining me to just talk through it. So I thought I'd give you a quick sense of what it is. But the main thing here is that the main aim of this session is to share our learnings in the hope that some of them might help you guys in producing your virtual events. So Sophos EVOLVE was a series of 8 sessions with region-specific content. There were 7 in November, so 7 months ago, and 1 in February. We delivered what we describe as an innovative TV-style format with local hosts, but you'll be familiar with that format because we're also delivering Event Tech Live at the moment, hence the studio behind me. But Sophos EVOLVE used a combination of live and pre-recorded content. And the series saw 40,000 registrations with a 45% turnout. So of those 40,000 registrations, 45 joined the session live. That was made up of around about 50% prospects, so new customers, 25% partners, and 25% existing customers. We used Slido to engage with the audience live, and we often adapted the agenda live based on what the audience what the poll results were saying or what their questions were. We had a roughly 50% attendee engagement through Slido, and also through the engage with the polls, but additional turnout through social media and such like. And we got some great feedback from the attendees that joined. You see one here says Conference of the Year, which is a big shout, but we liked it. And we were shortlisted for a virtual and hybrid award. So the main key take home was that it influenced the pipeline exceeded sales target by 112%. So basically, it was a successful event. And you notice I use the phrase "we" a lot, and that's because this event was a real collaboration between my team at First Sight Media, our production partners Distant Object, and of course the team at Sophos. And I'm delighted to say that I am joined by 2 of said now. So Martin and Chris joins me. Martin from Distant Objects and Chris from Sophos. Hello, chaps. Long time no see.
Hi, Rich. Nice to be here.
Excellent.
Hello, Rich. Good to see you too.
Great stuff. So I think rather than get into the nitty and the gritty of who we are and what we do, you can find that in our bios in Grip. I think let's just dive straight in, shall we? I'm pretty confident that our event colleagues who are watching just want to know what we learned and what we did. So perhaps Chris, I'll throw you into the deep end first, if that's okay. I'll ask you a very broad question, is how did we, and I use the collective we, how did we take a physical conference online?
Yeah, so, I mean, thinking back, it's a long time ago now. Seems like a long time ago now, but obviously things changed really, really quickly for us. We run a lot of events at Sophos, really successful events, and we have great engagement from our audiences at those events. And so we needed to keep that going, and we had to take it into the virtual environment. But we knew that we probably couldn't do that in the same way that we approached regular conferences that we run. So we took it online in a way that we felt would be consumable for everybody. So first up, we kind of looked at the content that we wanted to get across to our prospects and our customers and what they wanted to hear about. And then we kind of carved it up. So we didn't approach it necessarily in a way where we just want to replicate what we would normally do at a physical event. But we kind of said, look, let's maybe look at this in from the perspective of a virtual audience and make it a bit more consumable for them. So putting it into themed sections that were 2 or 3 hours over a few days, rather than just having a full day end to end, that kind of thing. So that was the first thing that we did really when we went from physical to virtual.
Yeah, and Martin, perhaps you could talk a little more about the format of how the sessions worked. They were kind of broken into sort of 1 hour chunks, weren't they, with a bit of this and a bit of that. Perhaps you can elaborate a bit on that.
A bit of this and a bit of that, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the thing, just to go back to Chris's point, I mean, I think the thing that was discussed and that everyone's aware of, or hopefully aware of, with a virtual event, is not everybody wants to sit in front of their monitor for 3 days. I mean, that's one of the key things. So shortening that down, focusing that down, was obviously the remit for Sophos to actually really distill the content down into a much shorter event, but still make all that content relevant. From a post-production side, the post-production side of things, I think it was, well, we wanted to do the pre-records. It was about timing the pre-records, but it was also about interspersing those pre-records with live presentations, or not live presentations, but live delivery and enhanced audience engagement. So as you mentioned in your intro, Rich, using Slido and things like that.
Yeah, and I think Chris, perhaps you can expand on this, but I think what you guys at Sophos did was you kind of said, well, we want this content, you know, in the same way that you would if you were doing a physical event in, I think it was supposed to be Vegas at one point, but a physical event wherever it was, you kind of looked at what you want. You want this keynote speaker, this member of the Sophos team to talk, and then we kind of looked at how we could make that engaging and keep that engaging. And so I alluded in my introduction, and Martin mentioned pre-recorded. So what we did is some of the content, the kind of main keynote sessions, we pre-recorded, didn't we, and used those topped and tailed by a good host, a local host, and then maybe went into panel discussion. How did you look at shaping that agenda?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, you know, we run a lot of events and they're really engaging events, and what you miss when you're not in person with people is that opportunity to engage with them and have the conversations outside of those presentations. And so we were really keen to try and inject as much of that into the event as we possibly could. And so, as you mentioned, putting pre-records together and then having some live sections in between those really gave us that opportunity to listen to what the audience were saying and include them in the event. So because we knew the audio and visual of the pre-records was going to be top notch and that would engage people, that then allowed us in the background, whilst the presentations were going on, to be looking at what people were saying on Slido, looking at what people were saying on social media, and with the hosts that we had that not only were great presenters, but also knew the subject, we were able to listen to that and then react to it immediately. So, you know, maybe the comments were going in a direction that we didn't expect them to with our kind of pre-prepared scripts and things. We were on occasion able to integrate that in and say, hey, look, we can hear this conversation going on out there, or this is the way the poll went that we've just run, and then comment on that. And I think the real beauty of that was that the audience then were seeing themselves on stage and feeling part of the event, rather than just sitting there watching a series of pre-recorded videos and kind of binge watching like a Netflix, you know, series or something. They actually felt like they were on the stage, that they were participating properly in this event, just like they would if they'd been in that hotel in Vegas.
Yeah, and I think that's really key. And what our audience might not know is that so we use a platform called vMix, and that's where you're seeing us come from now. And in vMix we create a bit of a green room space. So whilst we're playing the pre-recorded content, we're available in this green room, and not just the hosts or the speakers, but also Chris, your team, and yourself. Were in that green room space, and we were able to talk live. Oh, this poll result has come in this, or this question has been asked. Can we get someone from the Sophos team to respond to that? And actually, what that meant was one of our guests, Rachel Toback. She had recently released a sea shanty, as was the social norm at the time, and we actually dragged that in to so someone said, oh, will Rachel do a live version of the sea shanty? And of course Rachel blushed and said, well, I'd rather not. So we ended up pulling it off YouTube while the pre-record was playing, and then actually played it back live. And what that did was it sort of set the tone of the event for engagement, and it said, well, look, we had this question and we responded to it instantly. And what we learned was, what that meant was more people engaged. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with that concept by now and how it works, but it was good. And we set the tone for that early, didn't we? We had at the beginning of every session, we opened the stream 15 minutes before, and we asked people where they're joining from. And you saw in my slides that the word cloud was created, and that set the tone early, because the host would then respond to that. And that helped kind of steer the level of engagement that we were going to commit to for the rest of the event, I think. And I think that's what made it so popular, and Conference of the Year 2020, as indeed that particular Twitter mentioned. So let's think a bit more then about the standard of production. I think is obviously I'm massively biased, as Martin and I ran the production, but I think one thing that so Martin and I have been working with Sophos for a long time with physical events as well, and we're used to that kind of, I'm going to say, Apple-esque standard, and I think everyone knows what I mean by that. And I think Martin, how did we set about trying to recreate that really high level of production with these many moving parts?
Yeah, and just before I answer that question, I just want to go back to what you're saying there. I think, with everyone knows that it's all about a balance, and with the live content and the pre-recorded content, and so many events are just pre-recorded content, and that is, frankly, I mean, the content can be great, but that frankly can be dull for somebody just sitting there and binge watching a kind of Netflix series, of course, depending on the content. And of course, but there's a safety, you lower your risk if you just do pre-recorded content. On the other end of the spectrum, you have fully live events, which you, as an event organizer, you increase your level of risk, and you increase the level of dynamism, if you like, of the event. But I think what we did with the Sophos Evolve project was we hit a really good balance between having both of those. One, the dynamism of the live elements, the lower risk and the higher production values, and what the sort of more post-production control, if you like, over the pre-records. So to get to your point, yeah, it's interesting. With a physical event, or in the good old days, we'd send in a film crew, we'd film the presenters, we'd record the content, and we'd have great sound, great visuals, and we go to post-production and edit it all. Of course, in the midst of a pandemic, it's a very, very different situation, and that kind of goes out the window. We had presenters or content contributors all over the globe, and those regions, those areas, those states were all in different stages of lockdown, and they had different restrictions, different regulations, and so what we did was we actually took we actually had to have we had content coming in from all different types of production processes. So we had people going to studios, we did, I think, have some filming going on where it was allowed, but the majority of it was filming in people's homes, of course. And there's a lot of things to consider there to get the quality of production up. People are using different webcams, people are using their phones, people have different lighting, and there are a lot, and I'll come back to some of those in a bit later. There are a lot of things to consider to try and get a consistency of production values, because we're all aiming for high production values, but when you can't go and film with professional cameras and you're relying on webcams, you've got a way of how you can up the production quality. And one of the things that was actually great with the collaboration with Sophos is that early on we realized that some people didn't have great cameras or great microphones, for example. And so we, in discussion, we tried to get the best quality webcams and microphones to all the presenters that we could. Isn't that right, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think the presenters as well, an important thing to remember is that those presenters have been kind of thrown in at the deep end as well. You know, they're used to presenting on a stage or going to a studio, as you mentioned, but most of them are now either in their kitchen or in their office or whatever and being filmed there. So when the strategy there was to make sure that we had pre-meetings with them and to look at their setup. And I think actually the presenters really appreciated that, because they then felt much more comfortable about the environment that they were presenting in, and that really helped them. I mean, getting the cameras to some of those folks and getting the right mics to them was a bit problematic in some cases, and it wasn't perfect. But I think what I liked that you guys also did there was you said, right, well, look, we need to try and get the standards as high as possible here, and you developed processes that enabled the sound. You know, I don't know the details of it, Martin. I'm sure you could talk at length about it, but you know, I'd listen to the first take and kind of say, well, I'm not sure we can play that one, and then a couple of days later it would come back with this amazing sound on it, and I'm not quite sure how you did it, but that meant that the event was consistent, and I think it's really important to do that. I remember when we first started planning the event, I read a survey about what people would want from virtual events, and the top two things were clarity of video and audio, and then the third thing was engagement. And so that was the driving kind of rules that we played by for these events, was let's make sure we get the audio and visual as good as it can be, and then focus on engagement.
Yeah, for anyone that wants to find out more about Martin's 14-step process to the perfect audio, you can contact him through the Grit platform. I'm sure he'll be delighted to share that with you at great length. Sorry, Martin, before I let you, I was just going to say we ended up with 3 different types of pre-record, didn't we? We had the kind of what we would define as the self-record, where kind of someone went away, they were familiar, and they used something like Camtasia or something like that to capture themselves and their sound and their lighting. Then we had the kind of handheld Zoom record, which is where either Martin, myself, or in most occasions both of us would be on a Zoom meeting. We would help the speaker frame up their camera and you know, make sure it all looked good. Lots of hours were spent. Can you just try closing that window? And if you've got a window over there, could you just close that one too? And you've got some blinds and stuff like that. And then, as you say, there were a few studio incidents. The screenshot of Chris Hageman, the CEO, that I showed in my slides was obviously done in a green screen studio, and it's somewhere in the US. They were that was acceptable in the pandemic for them. And so yeah, that lots of different ways we did it. And I think what you did, Martin, was to then kind of wrap it all together. And I think consistency was the key. And I think that's what Chris was getting at. And what's interesting is, there's many things interesting, but this particular point is that you actually generally get away with a little bit of blip in video. Like you could, you know, the video could drop out a little bit, but as long as the audio is absolutely perfectly consistent, that's the key. And that's what we spent a lot of our time looking at on when we were joining those kind of handheld Zoom records, wasn't it, Martin?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the first part of the process, as Chris sort of mentioned, was actually, if you like, directing all these remote people who were going to record. making sure that their framing was right, their lighting was right, and so on, after they'd got their cameras, of course. Then so we developed a process that we could just repeat. We'd get on a Zoom call with them and we'd direct them effectively. Then, depending on whether they were going to record themselves, we would then give them sort of an introduction and developed another process to sort of effectively train them to use the software to record themselves. Or if we were using a Zoom, which had its advantages because we could actually sort of listen in, watch in, and direct them that way. So there was that whole directorial piece that we had to do just to get the material recorded. And then, of course, it was all coming in. In some cases, actually, we even when we couldn't get a camera because there was a global webcam shortage, we got people to use their phones, and so we would instruct them how to use their phones, and they'd have to set them up, and they'd film themselves on their phone. The result of that was we were getting all this different material coming in different formats, different frame rates, variable frame rates, different audio qualities, and we did, as Rich mentioned, a famous 14-step pre-edit process just to take all of that different material and get it into a state where we could put it in the edit suite and then do the edit. So that was really important. And to Rich's point about the audio, when you're doing a virtual event, you're in people's living rooms, or you're in their ears with headphones on, or you're in their car because they're listening to it, hopefully not watching it, but they're listening to it in their car. So they're really focused. A physical event, there's a big stage. They're in the back of a big conference hall. So it's live audio, live sound rather, and etc. So, but when you're in their home, when they're on a screen, they're really focused on what they're watching and what they're listening to. And as Rich said, you can get away with sort of a bit of a degradation in video quality or picture. That's okay, people will accept that. But when audio's not good and someone's listening on headphones or in the quiet of their own living room, they really notice that. And not in this event, but in other events from experience, when we haven't been able to get the audio up to the quality we'd like, that's when people come in and straight away and say the audio's not very good. So you really do have to focus in on that. And we use lots of post-production techniques to de-reverb audio, take noise out, and so on and so forth, just to get everything up to the best quality we could before we even started editing it together.
Yeah, sure. So I think before we get into some of the bad points that happen, because there are inevitably some learnings that our audience we can share with them. I just want to, as this is Event Tech Live, it seems rude to not talk about the type of technology that we use to deliver this event. So we've already mentioned Slido, and I can't say enough nice things about Slido. We love it. Although shout out to Glisser, who are doing a very similar thing for this event. But Slido did exactly what we wanted, because it also meant that so some of the questions that were coming through weren't just for the host or the presenter. They were actually quite technical questions. Cybersecurity technical questions about your software or about your hardware, Chris, and it meant that you could have multiple users in the back end of Slido all kind of responding it live to comments with the necessary technical expertise. Maybe talk us through that a little.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, contrasting it with if we were at a physical event, normally we'd have the main stage room, and then outside that you'd have the demo stations, the demo pods, where you'd maybe have some technical experts. And that's one of the main benefits of coming to these events, right? That you can ask the question and see the demo that you want to be able to get, because those experts are in town. And so we wanted to try and replicate that as much as we could. And Slido enabled us to do that because, as you said, we could schedule our experts to be on the back end of that system, seeing what the questions were coming in and answering them instantly. And I will say, some questions are more technical than others, some are more public than others. So we were able to moderate those questions as well, so that what the public could see were the really relevant questions to everybody, and that wasn't clogged up with the individual kind of customer level question that would come in as well. So the fact that you could staff it correctly and give people access to those experts was was one bonus. The second is that you could moderate that as well, so that the audience was still seeing the value from those questions and seeing the useful bits, and not seeing all the noise that was in there. And we did have a lot of questions, so there was a lot of noise in there.
There was, yeah, and obviously the moderation really helped that. So yeah, so we used Slido. Obviously, we used streaming technologies as well. I mentioned vMix already, which is what we use to dial in the live speakers. I think we used a bit of Zoom as well, but predominantly vMix to produce it and create the nice look and feel, and the consistency of nice look and feel as well, which applied both in the post-production content that Martin was creating, but then carried through to the live shows as well. So it didn't quite feel like there was such a big difference between those two. We actually created a landing page, and that the player was embedded next to Slido, so it was really clear. But then there was a wealth of other content below, including some what were deemed breakout sessions. So some of the recordings that didn't quite make it to air were still available and accessible to users on the page below. And I think that's one of the big things that made it different from a Zoom, a standard Zoom webinar or a standard Zoom meeting. I know, Chris, you guys at Sophos are big advocates of Zoom and have been for like long before the pandemic, right? 5-6 years at least. And I think what we created with Sophos Evolve was certainly different to a Zoom meeting. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, well, I think our audience told us that. My assessment is it was, but the audience reaction was very much so as well. So when you looked on social media, you've mentioned that hashtag that we all love, but there was a lot of positive feedback about the user experience. And actually, I'd mention another really small element actually of both Slido and the vMix platform that really helped, and that's the ability to, in vMix, run tickers across the bottom of the screen during the event, and in Slido, push out announcements at the top of the chat. I mentioned engagement was one of our top priorities, and just little things like that enabled us, when a speaker was mentioning a new service like the Sophos MTR Managed Threat Response Service, but at that point we could push an announcement through the chat or run a ticker across the bottom of the screen that told people where they could get more information about that, or tell them that there's now a poll open that we want them to take part in. It's little features like that within the technology, which you maybe can't do in Zoom so much, that really bridged that connection with the audience and made it relevant, made it, because that's immediately what's happening, right? You're hearing about this and you're thinking, well, I want to know more about that, and we were able to put that in front of them straight away. So yeah, it's little things like that that really just up the level of the user experience at the event.
Yeah, and I can see actually, if we take the Sophos Evolve mantle and we take it on, we have got a question that's come in live in the Glister platform. It says, do you feel moderation is key for enhanced engagement for audiences? I'll let you guys handle this. Martin, maybe you start. What are your thoughts on do you feel moderation is key for enhanced engagement for audiences?
I think moderation, I mean, in the context of this particular event, if I understand the question correctly, I think moderation allowed certain questions to go out live and certain questions to not go public, if you like. So I'm not sure how that actually would have helped the engagement as such. I think I think the important thing was that there was a team of people sitting behind the Slido who were effectively moderating, and they would very, very quickly answer a question, and whether that then went public or not, i.e. whether it was moderated in that sense, was down to the Sophos team effectively. And I think that people moderate. I think the moderation that was used did help. Certain questions went out and certain tickers went out, and I think that did help with getting more engagement back from people.
Yeah, because I think a lot of not a lot, but some of what happened was a lot of people enjoy the content full screen, right? So if you're using a platform like Slido, when you go full screen, you lose that panel on the right hand side. So we were using tickers to say exit full screen to take part, you know, and just little details like that I think helped. But I think if I might add my 10 pence to the answer to that question, I think Chris mentioned the word noise in the chat, and there was a lot. There was a lot of questions, and some of it wasn't relevant to the main audience. So I think in this particular case, yes, I do think moderation was really important, because otherwise I think that it may have got snowed with the kind of technical stuff and less of the songs that Sophos wanted to sing, perhaps, if I may say that. Go on, Chris, go ahead.
I think,
yeah, I just wanted to agree with what, I just wanted to agree with what you were saying there, Rich, and just add something on moderation, because that's exactly it. You know, the fact that you could ask a question and get it answered is number one, brilliant, and so you could do that. But what you want to do is make sure that if a good question is asked that maybe isn't being covered in the content, that you can still get that to the rest of the audience. And so by moderating and only exposing those things that are really relevant to everybody, that helps. That's the first thing that helps. But I think there's another side to a moderation that's not really in the Q&A, but actually you mentioned the people that are sitting backstage in the green room. And I think that's a form of moderation as well, in that what we had, and I think there are roles that you need in an event. It's not just, you know, presenting and streaming that you need to think about. It's having that kind of production backstage as well that can moderate the conversation. Because, as I mentioned, the fact that we pre-record enables us to listen to what's going on social and in the Q&A. And then because we had a host that understood the subject area, because we had a couple of other people in there that could interpret what was coming in and say, hey, actually, we should be asking our guests about this in the next break. That kind of moderation, if you like, of the content really made the event come alive, I think. And so I think anything you can do, the bottom line is anything you can do to improve the relevancy of what is being broadcast to the audience, and anything you can do to cut away the noise is going to help them. And so moderation is part of that, moderation of Q&A, but also of the discussions as well.
Yeah, because it always shaped, I promise, Martin, next. It always shaped the discussion that was happening, because what we tended to do was a little bit of host, then some pre-record or a chunk of pre-record, followed by a little bit of Q&A and another chunk of pre-record, and then a panel discussion. And essentially the results that we were getting from polls or the questions that were being answered really shaped what that panel discussion was about. And I think, yeah, and I agree. Martin, sorry, yours.
Yeah, I think another thing on moderation, moderated Q&A or compared to and completely unmoderated, it definitely has an advantage. I'm sure we've all been on seen streams on YouTube where you've got a chat and it just becomes a complete hi from London, hi from France, hi from Paris, and it's just complete noise. So definitely moderation compared to no moderation whatsoever. And there's no value in, well, it's nice for people to say hello for sure, okay? But there's no real value back to the people if they've got a question and it gets lost in a hello from Belgium or wherever it is. So definitely moderation helps reduce the noise there for sure.
Yeah, cool. Okay, good. Well, we're 2/3 of the way through our time already, so I'm gonna move us on to talk a little bit about how we can touch on KPIs if we can. And I know, Chris, you mentioned there was a lot less money spent on swag, Sophos swag in the virtual environment there was otherwise. But I think one of the questions that's come in is what aspects of the format that you had to use, i.e. the virtual, do you see taking forward in future events? I'll read that again, and Chris, give you some time to think about it. What aspects of the format that you had to use, i.e. virtual, do you see taking forward in future events?
Yeah, so when we look to the future, and hopefully we'll all be able to get back out there soon and meet in person a lot more regularly. I think virtual, my comment on that would be we're going to try and take all aspects of it with us. I don't think we're going to back away from virtual at all. We want our cake and we want to eat it. You know, the events were so well attended. In fact, one of the benefits of what we had to do was that we reached a far larger audience than we would normally reach. And we want to make sure that we keep engaging with that audience. So, you know, firstly, virtual, I think it's hybrid in the future. We will run physical events, but we will look to either stream those live or take the content from them and deliver them in a format like we've just been discussing in the future. So that's the first thing. The second is the engagement level. I did talk about how physical events, you know, you can engage with the audience a lot more easily, the demo pods and things like that. But I still think that actually when I think back to the physical events that we were doing, we can do a far better job of engaging throughout presentations in the same way that we were doing in virtual. So using Slido polls and things like that in the events when we're there in person, I think we will definitely invest in that. And it's not a case of just putting a little poll together before. I think we really invested in that as well. We reviewed the content, we made sure polls were relevant, we didn't push too many out. And then when we used them as well, so people didn't feel like they were wasting their time if they were voting on them. So yeah, that's definitely what we'll take forward. Is virtual is going to be part of the strategy going forward, and you know that's fixed now because we want to reach that big audience. And then secondly, increasing the interaction that we have at the physical events as much as we can, learning from what worked at virtual.
Yeah, I think obviously we're producing a lot of virtual events at the moment, as you can imagine, and I think what we're seeing is there is a certain level of there's a certain person that doesn't want to walk up to that demo and ask the technical person the question physically, right? There's the sort of person that thinks it might be a silly question. There's a certain anonymity to, you know, I hope we get some Slido swag after this, because I'm going to mention Slido again. You know, something like Slido, which does work in the physical environment as well. I think that's good. I think that there is more engagement because of that, and if you can give audiences moving forward both options, you know, if particularly if they are still, you know, there's a sustainability point as well. You know, I think all our event colleagues that are watching will know a lot of the key points. You know, the sustainability one, the cost, and I know that you've mentioned before that obviously this did cost you a lot less than it would have done if it was physical. But you still reached not only the same amount but more potential new customers, which there has to be a benefit to that moving forward as well. And I think my answer to that person's question is, you know, there's a balance now, and you know, we know that hybrid is the next step. But there's so many things that we've learned from virtual, and actually Sophos Evolve isn't the end of the relationship between First Light Media Distant Object and Sophos. We've actually then gone on to do your corporate kickoff, your sales summit, and various regional events, including a hideously timed one in Japan that got us up at 1 a.m. But we've taken this Evolve format and we've applied it, we've tweaked it, and we've honed it. So we've tried some things that didn't work so well since Evolve. Then we've found some things that have worked much better. I think. So would it be fair to say, Chris, that this kind of virtual / hybrid environment has got a place in the Sophos events arsenal moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I think we'd be silly to ignore the fact that we engaged tens of thousands of people for less marketing investment through these virtual events. So, like I said, we really do want to make sure that we keep engaging as many people as we can, and you know, we'll run Cybersecurity Summit again this year, the Evolve event that will be back on as a you know, pure virtual, but we'll also probably get out there if we can and run it physically as well. And so yeah, virtual is definitely part of the armory going forward, and it's a key part of it really. We do a lot of events, but I think you know, fewer and fewer of our events are going to be the pure, you know, Zoom webinar type thing, now that that our users have got used to that richer user experience. I think there's pressure on us to be able to deliver all of our events, even if they're just a short 20-minute regular webinar, to that same level of standard. And I think one of the things, people talk about Zoom fatigue. I think we all have an element of that, and that's the same for our audiences. As we all push out lots of virtual events, it's really important to raise that experience bar for people, and keep thinking about what you can add to the event to make yours stand out from others, because nobody is short of invitations to webinars these days. So we need to keep innovating as well.
Yeah, so something else has come in through Glisser. It's specifically for you, Chris. It says, how have you had to review? It says, Chris, how have you had to review your budgets for events going forward? I'm not sure if you can talk to that at all.
Yeah, well, in terms of how we review our events, well, similar way, we just look at the return on investment that we will get from the events. And at the moment, the situation is still a little bit uncertain into when we can get back out there. But we know you can't beat meeting people in person, and connecting with them physically, but you can still achieve a lot through virtual. And so from a budget perspective, we'll always look to spend our dollars as smartly as we can. And what that means for our physical events, probably choosing carefully where we go and who we invite to those physical events, because they're probably going to be a little bit smaller for a while until we maybe get back up to the sizes of events that we were running before. So we'll have to be smart about who we target and where we go from that point of view with budget. And then, as I said, virtual is a big investment, so we'll actually be looking at how we invest those dollars to make the user experience even better, and add that to maybe more of our regular programming as well. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but budget's always a tricky one. We would just try and get the best out of the dollars that we've got.
Yeah, so I think nothing new really, but I guess you've now got this extra solution in your arsenal in the form of virtual. So we are coming towards the end of our time. So I'm gonna ask you both one last question, if I may. And I think Chris, you've probably already answered this, but I'm going to get you to be concise about it. So if there was a key lesson that we can give to our event tech colleagues, what would be the one piece of advice that you would take from the learnings of Sophos Evolve, and indeed the shows that we've done since? Martin, I'm going to start with you. What one piece of advice would you take and give out?
I've got about three, but I'll keep it to one. It would be going back to what I said earlier, really, which from a production point of view, really focus on that audio. Really try and get that right. It sounds a little glib, but I think it's really important to focus on getting high quality audio. Yeah,
great point. Chris?
For me, I think I probably have answered it before. It would be about engagement. So I think there's a phrase that content is king, and it is always, but engagement in my eyes is king as well for a virtual event. That you've got to have great content, but if you're going to, you have to think and prioritize engaging the audience as much as you can, and putting yourself in their shoes in front of that screen for several hours. How are you going to keep them engaged? So yeah, engagement and looking at ways to engage the audience.
I'm not going to lie, Chris. I was really hoping you were going to say the one thing I would learn is to work with first-light media or distant object. But never mind, we'll glaze over that. But I think from my point of view, and I'm massively biased, and I hold my hands in the air to this, it is the benefit of a production. It is the benefit of the production company. This would have sounded a lot better coming from you, Chris, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I think the benefit to a production company that can pull in the technology and the necessary bits to essentially deliver what you're looking for, I think was. I think there's a big point here about collaboration, and I think what all three of us, as well as our relevant army of people that supported us to get to the point we did, I think there's a really good point about how collaboration is really good, whether that be collaboration in the production side, but also from the technology that we used and stuff like that. I think that's what I would encourage our audience to think about is that. So Excellent. Thank you very much. So I think with that, James may well join us as if by magic any moment, and there he is. Hello, James. We've been happily chatting. We've been happily chatting away, and I've answered all the questions that have come in. But one thing I've noticed over the course of these, we're on day 3 now, is that you've always got something intelligent to say about every subject. So I'm delighted to listen to what it is about this particular one.
Well, it's something that I remember David Audrain said yesterday on one of our panel sessions on the main stage, which was never to underestimate what hybrid now entails, that effectively are now running 2 events. He was very vocal about the fact that, you know, a lot of organisers think that when they go back to live, they can just incorporate an element of hybrid in there, bring a camera team in or something like that. But fundamentally, what you're doing is running 2 events. You need a team set up for the virtual, you need a team set up for the live, and that does present budget issues, but operationally that was very much something that he recommended is the best course of action. It's great to hear some of the successes that you've had, but I would certainly say that when we do go back to physical events and we want to incorporate some of those elements that Chris said he would like to retain, I think it's important not to underestimate the manpower that's actually required and the expertise and skill set to do that.
I think that's a really good point, James, actually. And my other answer to my own question about one piece of advice would have been, don't think because it's virtual, it's quicker and easier, because it's not. It has, there are still a lot of moving parts. And whilst, yes, you might not be dealing with caterers and you might not be dealing with venues, you'll be dealing with other things that you didn't know. Wrangling speakers remotely, as James will attest to, can be very painful. I must confess that I only submitted my slides about an hour ago, even though I was supposed to submit them a week ago. So it's not easy doing it virtual. So don't fall into the trap that you think it might be.
Absolutely. Rambling moderators as well is one to avoid if you could do that. Guys, thank you very much. Rich, thanks very much for putting the session together. It's been great to listen in and get that little bit of insight. What I should point out, completely unashamedly, is that Rich is going to join us again a little bit later on today, 2:45 p.m. Central Time, for Behind the Scenes of Event Tech Live Part 2. We're going to be taking some questions from our audience into how us at the Event Tech Live operations end of things and Rich and all the team at First Sight Media put all of this together. But for now, Chris Weeds, Martin Briggs-Watson and Rich Belcher, thanks very much for joining us today on the main stage at Event Tech Live. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks, James.
Thanks very much.